Homesteaders, Gardeners, and Cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen. Today we are making a sauerkraut or a fermented cabbage, which if you're interested in doing fermentation and you're brand new to it, sauerkraut is kind of like the gateway to all things fermentation because it's very, very easy and very difficult to mess up. But the one that I'm going to make today is called Curtido. And so instead of a traditional kind of German style sauerkraut where it's salt and cabbage and maybe some caraway seed, this is more of a Latin-based sauerkraut or fermented cabbage product, and it has carrots and jalapenos and onions and some oregano. And so it's a little bit of a different flavor profile. I am definitely not a caraway person. And so while I am okay with traditional sauerkraut, I don't usually put the caraway in it. We eat a lot more Latin-based foods, tacos and things like that, than we do German sausages and that kind of food. And so this is definitely more in line with the way that we eat. And I'm going to show you how to make it. It's a great gateway, and I'll give you some hints and tips and tricks for fermenting all different kinds of vegetables along the way. My biggest piece of advice to you is get a scale, because doing it by weight instead of by volume is, a lot of recipes for beginners, they just tell you, sprinkle on a tablespoon of salt onto a head of cabbage. And you can have really hit or miss results with that depending on how big your cabbage is, what kind of salt you use, because they weigh different amounts and measure differently depending on whether it's kosher salt. And then the kosher salts vary depending on whether it's Diamond Crystal or Morton's. And then if you're using something like Redmond's real salt, it's got a completely different weight as well, and it's very dense because of all the minerals that are in it. And so I really like to do things by weight rather than volume, because I think you get much more repeatable and consistent results where you don't have some failures. And so I'm going to give you some hints and tips on that, and so you can get started with all things fermenting. But sauerkraut or cabbage, fermented cabbage, great way to start. Let's get started.
I didn't weigh this head of cabbage, but I would guess it's about 4 pounds. And because I'm doing this whole recipe based on weight and not based on volume, it's going to be accurate regardless. So I could be doing this with a cabbage that was half this size or twice this size, and it would still work out because it's all going to be based on percentages. So I did have to peel off a couple of leaves on the top that were starting to get a little bit funky, but cabbage stores for a very long time. There's a reason why it was a winter vegetable and it got stashed in root cellars. I'm just thinly slicing this, and you can slice this as thin or as thick as you like. It doesn't really matter. I think when it's thinner, I think it's easier to get juice out of it. And then you can also use a mandolin if you want, but it was pretty easy to do this by hand. And so I just decided to cut this up by hand. And then we're going to need some carrots and oregano for this recipe. And I didn't happen to have any in my fridge, so I just came out to the garden. These were carrots that got planted probably mid-May. I got them in a little bit late. And initially, I didn't think they were going to do well, but I've got a nice little harvest here. And I'm kind of waiting until I get a frost before I harvest all of them, because they will sweeten up a lot once there's been a frost. And so I've just been storing them in the ground. And I run the risk of them splitting from a lot of rain, but generally they'll hold pretty well.
You guys want a carrot?
I have a dog who will follow you anywhere for a carrot. And then, I don't know about you guys, but in my climate, oregano basically is a weed. I planted it once when I first moved onto the property in 2012, and I have it everywhere. And then I need a couple of onions. And these are my onions from this year's harvest. And I'm not really following exact measurements here, but I'm kind of matching the shape of the cabbage. So I'm going with long, skinny pieces rather than diced. And I decided I wanted about a cup of onion. And then this is a little shredder peeler that will julienne carrots. And it works, but it's a little bit awkward. As you can see here, it's hard to hang on to the vegetable, but it definitely goes a lot faster than grating it with a grater or cutting it by hand. And I probably have about a cup of carrot here as well. And because these were so fresh right out of my garden, I just left the peel on them. And then here is some of our oregano. I actually have 2 different kinds of oregano, but this is the kind of typical oregano that spreads like crazy. And then I have some Italian oregano that's a little stronger flavored, but it doesn't overwinter the way this stuff does. And I'm just going to give this a quick dice to chop it up a little bit. And then we need some jalapeno as well. And again, I just kind of eyeballed this. I had these extra jalapenos sitting around on my counter. And so I went with 3 fairly small sized jalapenos. There's different varieties there, one that turns yellow, one that turns red. And I did take the seeds out because I didn't want it to be super hot. And then I dumped all that into a different container so that I could tare my bowl. I wanted to get a weight of all of these vegetables. And that weight was 1615 grams, so 1,615 grams. And then 2% of that is how much salt I want to add. And that works out to 32 grams of salt. I love this chart that's put out by the Probiotic Jar that talks about all the different percentages of salt depending on what vegetable you're using. And in this case, I'm using Redmond's real salt. You can use any salt that doesn't have iodine on it. The iodine just inhibits the bacterial activity, and so you don't want to put iodine in your fermentation. And I'm just weighing this out on the scale to get to 32 grams. But you can use pickling salt, you can use kosher salt, it doesn't matter. And then I like to just toss everything with the salt and then let it sit for a little bit. It's going to release a lot of moisture all on its own without me getting in there and really manhandling it. And so I like to stir it and then walk away for about a half an hour. This is what it looks like after a half an hour. And you can see it's wilted quite a bit. And now I'm really going to start massaging it. So I'm squeezing it. I'm trying to get everything in there to release more liquid. And I probably massage this for a minute or 2. And what you're trying to do is release a lot of liquid, because that liquid sitting on top of your brine is what's going to keep everything from molding. And you can see here, I've got quite a bit of liquid, and that color is from the carrots that are in there. So that's perfect. This is a half a gallon mason jar, which is really a nice size. You want to leave a little bit of room at the top of your jar when you're doing fermentation. If you fill it really super full, as it gets really active and bubbly, it will sometimes bubble over. And so I always like to leave at least an inch of room. And of course, everything here is really clean, including my hands. But there's natural yeasts on that cabbage, and that's what we're counting on. This is a pickle packer, but you can use anything. Rolling pin would work. You just want to pack the vegetables down in the jar so that there aren't any air spaces in there. And you're trying, again, to get as much liquid on the top as possible. And then I'm going to use a couple of leaves of cabbage on the surface to try to hold underneath the liquid all of those little floaty bits that are there. And it's not going to be 100% successful, but it's going to be mostly successful. And that's what I'm trying to do. Everything you have that's floating at the surface has an opportunity to mold. And so the more you can get things underneath the surface of the liquid, the more success you're going to have. Other than weighing your ingredients, that's the other number one thing to know about fermentation, is keeping your product underneath the liquid. There's a little bit of stuff stuck to the edge of the jar here, and I noticed it as I started to put the spring in, and so I'm removing the stuff that's on the glass on the sides, because that will definitely mold, or at least it has much more of an opportunity to than most of that would. You could be there all day, so you can't be ridiculous about it, but get the worst of it. And then I just recently bought these springs. This is a new fermentation tool to me. I've tried a bunch of different things, including just bags of liquid or different stones that are made to sit on top of the liquid. This is a new product from Ball. And then that lid is actually got a vent in it so that air can get out but not in. I'm putting the date on the jar because that's important if you're busy. And then here we are about a week later.
All right, you guys, this has been fermenting since September 24th, and today is the 4th of October. Yes, today is October 4th. And so this has been fermenting for a little over a week. So let's give this a try. I want to make sure I get some of that jalapeno in there. Super crunchy, pretty salty. A little bit of sweetness from the carrot. And a little bit of heat from that jalapeno, but not bad, like really mild. And then you get that little bit of overnote of that oregano, that fresh oregano in there. It's really delightful. Yeah, this is really good. I've done a variation on this in the past with carrots and jalapeno, but this is the first time I've really done a full-on recipe for curtido. And yeah, I really, really like it. So this is a great recipe to get started with, especially if you're a little hesitant on normal sauerkraut, so typical sauerkraut. It's just delightful. And we could ferment this, you know, for a month if we wanted to. We could go a lot longer. I'm going to stop here because I don't like things super, super funky. And at this point, it's got some of those nice probiotics in there. I'm just going to stash this in my fridge and we'll use it all winter. Yeah, give it a try, you guys. Really nice way to get started with fermentation.
Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.